ever stop and think about what really makes you you? I mean, what's behind your gut feeling of what's right and what's wrong? Well, today, we're going to dig into the very architecture of your personal morality from the initial blueprint right through to the final build. So let's just get right to it. Where do your morals actually come from? I mean, is it something you're born with? Is it something you learn along the way? Or, is it something else entirely? Let's dive in and find out. Okay, so the first big piece of the puzzle, and you could argue it's the biggest, is the world you're born into. Seriously, think of your culture as the social architect. It's the one that hands you that very first moral blueprint. So, what are we even talking about when we say culture? Well, it's this unique system of meaning, something that's shared and passed down through generations. And its whole purpose is to help a group survive and, find meaning in life. A simpler way to think about it, it's basically the lens through which we first learn to see everything. And look, this isn't just about things like holidays or what kind of food you eat. Culture is woven into the very fabric of our lives. We're talking about the clothes we wear, the manners we're taught, the language we speak. It even shapes our shared ways of thinking and feeling. It's the whole shebang, the total environment. And right there, baked into every single culture, you'll find these moral codes. They're kind of like the unwritten and, sometimes written, rule book about what's considered good and what's bad. This is what guides our behavior and really forms our first understanding of what's fair and just. But this, of course, brings us to a huge question. I mean, this is one of the central conflicts in all of moral philosophy. Are these moral rules totally relative to each culture? Or are there some universal truths that apply to everyone, everywhere, no matter what? So this debate really splits into two main camps. On one side, you've got what's called cultural relativism. This idea says that morality is totally subjective. What's perfectly right in one culture could be seen as completely wrong in another. But on the other side, you have the belief in universal values. This view holds that, nope, there are some ethical truths that are objective. They're standard, and they apply to all of us. And you can see just how complicated these cultural values can get. I mean, take this example from Filipino culture. There's this core value that promotes a really deep sense of community and shared identity. It's a beautiful thing. But there's a flip side. That same cultural environment can sometimes lead to this intensely competitive, every person for themselves kind of attitude. It's a perfect illustration of how the exact same cultural source can create both incredible strengths and some pretty serious weaknesses. All right, so culture gives us the blueprint, but how do we as individuals actually learn to read that blueprint and start, building our own moral structure? This means we've got to shift our focus from the outside world to what's happening on the inside. So this internal process has a name. Psychologists call it moral development, and it's definitely not something that just happens overnight. It's this progressive journey where we slowly, piece by piece, form our own personal sense of what's right and wrong, what's proper and improper. The famous psychologist Jean Piaget actually mapped this whole thing out in stages. He noticed that as really little kids, like under 4, were basically unconcerned with morality. Then, from about 4 to 7, we developed this unconditional respect for rules. Whatever a parent or teacher says, that's the law. No questions asked. But then, as we get a bit older, we start to realize, hey, wait a minute, rules are a social agreement, and our group can actually change them. And that leads to the final stage here, where we develop a much more complex, almost legalistic understanding of how rules work and why they exist. Now, another psychologist, Lawrence Kohlberg, took this idea and expanded on it with his levels of moral reasoning. So at the first level, what he called pre-conventional, it's really all about me, me, me. What do I get out of it, or how do I avoid getting in trouble? Then you move to the conventional level. Here, what other people think starts to matter a lot, and we're focused on being a good citizen, obeying the law. But some people, not everyone, reach the post-conventional level. And this is where things get really interesting. You start operating on these abstract principles of justice, and you might even decide that a certain rule or law is itself unjust and needs to be challenged. And all of this brings us to the real heart of the matter. Because beyond the culture around you and the developmental stages you go through, there's the very core of who you are. Your character. At the end of the day, this is the foundation that determines the choices you make. So, what exactly is moral character? Well, put simply, it's the leaning of both your heart and your mind to do good, to do virtuous things. It's not about what you own or what you've achieved, it's about who you are deep down on the inside. So, how is that character even built? There's this really powerful idea that breaks it down into a kind of chain reaction. And believe it or not, it all starts with the smallest possible thing, a single thought. Because you see, those thoughts, once you give them a voice, well, they become your words. And the words you choose to speak out loud start to shape your reality. And then, when you repeat those actions over and over and over again, they stop being these big, conscious choices. They become automatic. They become your habits. And what are your habits? Well, they're the things you do without even thinking. And those are the true building blocks of your identity. Over time, they solidify and become your character. And finally, your character, which is just the sum total of your thoughts, your words, your actions, and your habits, that's what sets your path. That is what becomes your destiny. So let's bring it all together. Culture hands you the blueprint. Your own development builds the structure. But that leaves one last, absolutely crucial question. Who's holding the tools? At the end of it all, who is the final architect of your character?